The Kawanishi H8K flying boat takes off for Japan in War Thunder. Let's check it out. Even while the older H8K was just barely entering service, plans were already being developed for its replacement. The Japanese Navy anticipated a significant need for larger, longer-range flying boats, and even though the H8K was quite capable for the time, they wanted even more performance. The initial prototypes of the H8K showed some design flaws, which were quickly corrected, and the first pre-production aircraft took off in January of 1941. By the beginning of 42, production of the basic model was in full swing, and already the aircraft was showing its potential and high performance. It was produced in several versions, including a basic patrol reconnaissance variant, an armed transport, an unarmed transport, and several armed versions intended for use as long-range maritime patrol bombers. The H8K2 was the definitive model, with over 100 produced. It featured the Mark VI anti-surface vessel radar system, external hardpoints for weapons, improved gun turrets, and additional radio and navigation equipment. The H8K3 was an upgrade over the H8K2, which had retractable landing floats, improved flaps, and additional gun turrets. Only prototypes of the K3 were built, and in War Thunder, we get both of these versions. The H8K was used on long-range missions throughout World War II, including the little-known second raid on Pearl Harbor and numerous anti-shipping missions all over the Pacific Theater. The Allies found the H8K a difficult aircraft to counter, as it was covered in gun turrets and was a legitimate threat to surface shipping. The H8K is generally considered to be the best and most capable military flying boat of World War II, and it was unmatched in overall performance capabilities until many years later. In War Thunder, we get two versions. The H8K2, found in the Japanese tech tree at rank 1, battle rating 3.3, and also the H8K3 premium aircraft, found at rank 2 in battle rating 3.7. These are classified as long-range bombers, so they get the air spawn in realistic battles, and obviously they're flying boats, so if you choose the runway spawn, or if you take off after landing, they're going to start off in the air just over the airfield. Both versions carry identical weapon loadouts, getting 4 options for bombs, or a set of torpedoes. The 60-kilogram bombs are generally going to require a direct hit in order to take out targets, but all of the others are pretty capable. With the heavier loadouts, you can do enough damage to destroy, or at least heavily damage, strategic bases. Now, the torpedoes are only situationally useful. Obviously, if you take this plane out into naval battles, they're a lot more relevant, but in air battles, only a few of the maps have ships to attack. The good news is that the Type 91 torpedoes it gets are fairly easy to deploy. They can even be released a bit faster than many of the other torpedoes, and have an effective range well out over a kilometer. But just remember that these don't have any kind of homing system, so if you're attacking ships with them, you have to make sure that the ships aren't moving unless you're up close. Now, the flight performance of the H8K surprised me. In short, it's actually really good, even considering that this is a low-rank flying boat. This also brings us to the main difference between the two versions in the game. The H8K3 is significantly faster and has double the climb rate over the H8K2. Considering that the K2 already has decent flight performance, the K3 is just an amazing vehicle for a low-tier flying boat. No kidding. I was seriously surprised at how well it climbs, and at its overall speed. For maneuvering and turn performance, well, it's a huge 4-engine flying boat, so You're not going to win any dogfights, and you won't be dive bombing with this thing. What you can do, in addition to, the low altitude torpedo attacks, is very effective high altitude bombing. Even the H8K2 does well enough that with a bit of a side climb, it'll be a serious threat to enemy bases. And the K3 is almost untouchable if nobody climbs up to get you in the first 2 or 3 minutes of a match. Flying the H8K3 up at higher altitudes, I was able to avoid interception about 90% of the time. And even with the K2, I avoided interceptors about half of the time, which is a better ratio than I usually have in low-tier bombers. Now, there are some caveats though. The bad news is, if somebody does catch you, this plane isn't especially difficult to bring down, and it's a huge target that's pretty easy to hit. For whatever reason, the in-game threat posed by its gun turrets is pretty tame compared to its track record in real life. And in all of the footage here, my gunners are fully upgraded, and all of their stats, including the quantity of experienced gunners, and the entire crew are upgraded to expert level. Still, in a lot of cases, it seems like they just don't shoot, even with targets easily within range and within the field of fire. It may just be perception bias, I'm not sure, but I personally had much better luck using the gunner view to control the gun turrets manually. And that isn't saying much since I'm not very good at manning the gun turrets. Now, the H8K can also be used as a low-altitude bomber, especially if you're going out with the torpedoes. But just remember that this thing is not as sturdy as it looks like it should be, and most of the time it won't take too much attention from enemy fighters to bring it down. The good news is, its bombs are really accurate in low-level drops, so it's just as viable to do a high or low altitude attack profile in terms of the damage you're doing to enemy targets. One last caveat about that. Be very careful in dives. Whether you're diving in for a torpedo attack, flying back to land and rearm after a bombing run, or just diving to get away from something. This is a huge and heavy aircraft that does not take very well to high G pull-up maneuvers, and it can't really do much to slow down if you're close to the red line in a dive, so be careful with the throttle when you're dropping altitude. Visually, the H8K is a huge flying boat. It looks about as good as a big flying boat can look, but I suspect that most players are going to find this plane to be pretty ugly. On a high note, the H8K2 gets a pretty cool white paint job that looks pretty nice and is visually distinct. Otherwise, for both, it's just the plain Japanese navy green, which is fine. Landing this monster is easier than you might think. Landing in water, obviously, is usually pretty simple since there isn't a beginning or end to the runway most of the time, and if you're in naval battles, you can use this to claim objectives. Setting down on land in air battles is pretty basic. You just line up and slow down. You don't have any landing gear, but if you're in the H8K3, don't forget to drop the wingtip floats. Otherwise, no special caveats. The cockpit is just a placeholder, and it's not that great. I did manage to line up a torpedo attack in VR, and that was pretty fun, but otherwise, the visibility is terrible, and it's just not fun to fly this from the cockpit view. Not a fan. To close out on the H8K flying boats. These planes have impressive flight performance for what they are, and the H8K3 in particular climbs like a champion. The bomb load is adequate for a low-tier bomber, and it can do respectable damage to ground targets. It's got torpedoes, which I always love, and it can capture objectives in naval battles, so that's cool. However, its gun turrets aren't super effective. It's a huge 4-engine flying boat, so it doesn't really maneuver well, and it's an absolutely enormous target that's pretty easy to hit in air combat. The final verdict on the H8Ks is that these two planes give Japan a great low-tier bomber, and the H8K3 in particular really stands out as an outstanding vehicle for its rank. If you need a low-tier Japanese bomber, here you go. As always, thanks for watching.